in different dimensions and different joints, but flex, flexing, extended, extending. We just take those concepts and say plantar flex, dorsiflexing, flex, plantar flexing, internally rotated, externally rotating. It's the same concepts. Where are you and where are you going? And instead of talking about your center of mass, where are you and where are you going, we're just talking about pieces within you. Hey, elbow, where are you at? Where are you going? Hey, left hip, where are you at? Where are you going? Hey, pelvis, where are you at? Where are you going? So even though we're applying it a lot of different places, the concepts are still simple and very direct. We analyze motion joint by joint, and when we're analyzing a joint, it's where are you at and where are you going? And it can be that simple if you keep it simple. Right? So I'm going to open it up for questions. Remember, the intent of this isn't to re-lecture stuff. I wasn't here for the radial joint. Can you go over that again? Absolutely not. But I can clarify if you say, in class, you brought up this example of, am I correct in thinking that this, right? That's what today is about. It's not re-lecturing anything. It's about fine-tuning things and making sure everybody's on the same page, okay? All right, who wants to lead us off?
So, I remember specifically one of it was about the rotation of the pelvic girdle. When you were on one knee, you had both of your knees set at right angles, you were like kneeling down on the ground, and then you rotated it one way. And you kind of talk about the difference between like the rotation of, I guess, the femur in the pelvic girdle on one side and how it adducts the other way. Is that about how complicated like one motion is going to get, or could it improve?
Yeah, I would think that that would be probably as complicated as the question that I can ask you in the text. Yeah, I'd say that was a level 10. Yeah. Now, keep in mind, that's all relative, but just based off of my pelvis does one thing, but it was because of two separate motions at the hips. Yeah, that's way up there. Saw some other hands going on.
In that specific example that we just mentioned, I'm struggling seeing the external rotation and rather than the internal rotation.
And first of all, thank you for your question. Thank you for your honesty. And the reason you're having trouble is because it's not easy to see. So don't be hard on yourself. My major professor at Auburn, she is the godmother of my oldest son. I owe her a lot. And she has a tough time seeing when it's internally rotated and externally rotated with the pelvis. And it's because of the temptation of seeing the bigger piece moving like you were taught to see the little piece. So again, imagine if you went to a faucet. Back in my day, we drank from the water hose, right? We didn't care about salmonella or everything. But imagine how confusing it would be if all your life you spun the knob for the water hose and you knew lefty, loosey, righty, tighty. But then one time you go to hold the hose and the whole house does this, right? You would be like, oh, righty, tighty, lefty, loosey, but that's not the case. Yeah. So I just want you to remember that the reason it's hard to see is because it is hard to see. However, once we do see it, then you're going to have it for the rest of your life. So I want you to take that into account. We are good. Okay, so let's take a look at it. And keep in mind, nozzle for the hose, lefty loosey, righty tighty. If the house moved, it would be the opposite, right? I mean, it would still be the same motion, but moving the bigger piece from the smaller piece. So first of all, let's remember, internal rotation and external rotation is moving the smaller piece about the bigger piece, right? So if this was the knob to turn the water on, right, you'd say lefty loosey to you, righty tighty to turn it off, okay? But now let's look at what happens when In the body, we have the ability to move the bigger piece above the smaller piece. So let's look at what happens when I do this. I'm not doing this. I'm doing this. I'm not doing this. I'm doing this. So, concept-wise, a few ways you can look at it. If I know, if moving the smaller piece is easy, it's easier for everybody. It's easier for me as well. So if I know that I can figure it out if I move the smaller piece, even though I didn't move the smaller piece to move, I know that I can move the smaller piece to go back home. So in other words, I started off not in anatomical position all the way, but I started off in anatomical position in terms of rotation. I'm flexed, but I'm neither externally nor internally rotated, right? So when I do have rotation, I can say, hey, here's my pelvis's reference to this. How would I have to rotate my hip to go back home? I'd have to internally rotate it to go back. So that means I had to externally rotate it when I had right lateral pelvic girdle rotation. It's tough, but it's doable. It's possible if you trust the clues. If you trust the clues. Here to here, I'm not quite seeing. How would I have to move to go home? I have to internally rotate to go home, so I had to externally rotate when I had right leg. My right hip, and my left hip, external rotation. Another way to look at it too is if I froze everything and brought everything back, I would be here. I know it's tough to see, but doing the best I can. Did that help?
Yes.
Good. Yes, ma'am. You've been waiting a long time, so I hope it's a good one.
Is it possible to have bilateral scapular upward rotation with bilateral scapular elevation?
Usually they go hand in hand. They do go hand in hand.
Because there are some examples I was kind of like doing myself where I thought that they were both like the same or like they go together.
No, they do a lot, yeah. But let me let you in on a little inside secret. Upward rotation is a continuation of elevation. Like the whole concept of it. When you have elevation, you tend to cancel out because you want to keep something in your hand, right? So what happens is that you have a little bit of upper rotation with simultaneous motion of shoulder adduction. But when they do the same thing, you get excessive, and that's what we term as upper rotation. So, because if you think about it, the collarbone can only do this. I mean, it can't do any, oh, hello baby, hello my darling. I mean, it can just do this. So when you elevate, you do this really the same thing as this. It's just this one you get more. Yeah. So they do work hand in hand. They go hand in hand together. They're a lot. So one way to look at elevation is limited upward rotation. Aha, yeah. But we won't look at it like that on the test. No. Yes, ma'am.
So for the scapula, you mentioned abduction and abduction related to like protraction, retraction, elevation,
Okay. Well, let's take a look at it. So if you were to, let's pretend, put your arm out and try your best to like retract your scapula, okay? So let's say you were going to reach forward and give me a high five, but you were going to like push. Okay, give me a high five. Okay, so what's cool about that is you moved your scapula and your shoulder. And how I know you did that is because if you only moved your scapula, your arm would have across this way. You had to horizontally abduct in order to keep your hand moving straight. You can even feel it. That's horizontal adduction, and that's horizontal adduction. In other words, if we look at this as a new position, well, look, there's your sternum. So technically, this is looking straight ahead of me, looking straight ahead of me. So look how you shouldered this when you went from there to there. And the reason is because joints rotate, any pure, thought I ran into this dude. Because joints rotate, any pure rotation is going to move you out of some straight line. So the only way to keep your hand in a straight line is to move two things at the same time. One's trying to take your hand this way, the other's trying to take your hand that way. They cancel each other out, cancel out rotation, summate translation. So that's, and it goes back to that question as well. When I elevate the scapula and I keep my hands or my arm in a pendulum, it's because my shoulder adducted. Because if it didn't, this is what would happen. So the scapula and the shoulder, like Batman and Robin, they work together a lot, especially when you're trying to keep your hand fixed, hand on things, work on things. There's a lot of simultaneous motion, scapula and shoulder. Good question. Yes, ma'am?
On page 34, you have two examples of a sagittal plane form and a frontal plane form, the elbow, shoulder, and scapula motion. Could you explain the motion in the frontal plane form? Because I got the sagittal plane, but I didn't know if it was different from doing it in the plane, the way to do it.
Sure. So keep in mind, at the end of the day, it is ridiculously tough to have all motion in one dimension. I mean, we really move in combinations and stuff. However, for the test, I could say, hey, what was happening in this one plane? Meaning that even though you might be in combinations, I'm only asking the component that's frontal, the component that's sagittal. Okay, so I just want to clarify before we talk about it. Okay? So frontal plane. So we have kind of a wide grip, right? So that way we're in mostly ab and ad world. Is that correct? Okay. So we're in ab and ad world. The illusion here is that if you're doing, it's a different form of the hose. Smaller pieces move about bigger pieces, we named them, but in the body, bigger pieces can move about smaller pieces and it gets confusing. So I teach you elevation and adduction, and I'm moving these little smaller pieces about the big pieces. But when we're doing a pull-up, my arms can't go anywhere. I have to have those joint motions fixed up here to move the big piece up and down. So it looks different. If you only hold on to global references, elevation's going up, depression's going down, you're going to get fooled. And I don't mean you personally. You're going to get fooled when we fix these parts up here and move our center of mass up and down. Okay, so let's look at, before we get to the pull-up, let's go to a similar task that requires smaller pieces to move about bigger pieces, like a lat pull down, right? So on the way up, in the frontal plane, at the shoulders, extension of the elbows, scapula upward rotation and elevation, right? And then coming down, adduction of the shoulder, flexion of the elbows, downward rotation of the scapula, depression of the scapula. Bless you. We're good? Okay, now when it flips, it's not that the motions flip, it's your instinct want to say up, down means something. So if I'm holding on here and now my hands aren't allowed to go up and down and I have to pull my center, try to do that. Adduction of the shoulder, flexion of the elbow, downward rotation of the scapula, and depression of the scapula. On the way down, abduction of the shoulder, extension of the elbow, upward rotation of the scapula, and elevation of the scapula, even though my center of mass is going down. That's where the confusion can come into. But remember, joint motion is not globally referenced, it's locally referenced. So to my shoulder, from here to there is the exact same motion as from here to there. Suicide. Did that help? Ooh, I'm getting a workout just doing exercise. I'm in good shape.
Sir.
All the exams you practice on page 30, on this right side, that be, it says bilateral stabilization, it would be special
Okay, so the question is on page 50, the hey girl, hey example. Love that. Hey girl, hey. The reality is that there is not enough information for me to answer that. Globally, what I mean by that is, let's pretend my scapulas don't do anything and I do this. Did I elevate the left one? So you can see how the temptation is there, right? Because one's higher than the other. But just because one's higher than the other doesn't necessarily mean that I had to have elevation of depression. That question is mostly to show you how the trunk can bend and the neck can bend. But if my trunk bends like this, I don't necessarily have to have done this or this or this or this or so. And I'm not saying I didn't do it. I'm just saying that that kind of question wouldn't be one that would be fair to definitively say the scapula did something, because just because I lean my trunk this way and my left shoulder is higher than my right shoulder doesn't necessarily mean it had to elevate.
So you can only say in that example definitively that your trunk and your cervical moves, correct?
Myrrh.
Okay, so I'm not really understanding the upright row example, how it's like, I want a deviation. Like, how's it, I want a deviation?
I was not listening to you. Playing with your phone.
For the example with the upright row, I don't understand how it's a owner deviation.
Okay, that's a good question. Baby shark, baby shark, I just got that song stuck in your heads, and I'm sorry. But it was stuck in my head, and I didn't want to suffer alone. Okay. Functional circle of grip means that in certain tasks, certain things that you do, you need to hold on to stuff. Right? The way we ensure that is with canceling out joint motions. We just established that scapula works with shoulder. If I want to keep my hand straight, well, if I want to keep my grip on something and keep my fingers underneath that something, and my shoulder is bringing it up, not just up, but it's going to externally rotate as I go up. Meaning that if I stay pronated, would we agree that I'm in a pronated position here? If I stay pronated, this is what it would look like. I'm pronated, I can't go anymore. Supinated, pronated. If all I did was move my shoulders, this is what the new position would be if I stayed pronated. How can I keep my fingers under the bar? By supinating. Pronation, supination. I didn't start out like this, right? I started out like this. So what happens is that it's subtle and it's hard to see, but the supination, notice how my thumb is medial, right? This is the lateral part. My thumb is lateral, my thumb is medial. We're good? Mm-hmm. Okay. Watch how subtle. Once my shoulder starts to come up, that's when I start spinning, and my thumb is now lateral. It's like Harry Potter, man. Did you see it? Do you want to feel it? I'm not asking you like touch me. I'm saying like, do you want to feel your radial ulnar joints move while you do like a row?
Yeah, sure.
Come on now! You're the next contestant in radial ulnar joint motion. Do you mind recording for me? All right, here we go, guys. So we agree that we're pronated. Everybody agree we're pronated? Okay? Right. Now watch how cool. When you come up, go slow, go slow, go slow, go slow, go slow, go slow, go slow. Bam! Thumb, lateral. Don't move your let go. Don't move your radial ulnar joints. Elbows have nothing to do with the radial ulnar joint. shoulder has nothing to do with the radioulnar joint. That's your new position. And you didn't start out right there, right?
No.
You started out how?
Pro.
Yeah, so to go back home, you'd have to do this. So that proves that you had to supinate when you left home. Let's do it one more time. Up. There it is, right there. So almost think of it like this. Traditionally, we look at smaller piece moving around the bigger piece. But what's really happening is that we know that the radius here necessarily isn't moving like we're used to seeing it. So what happens is that the shoulder actually rotates the head down. The shoulder actually rotates, and that's when the supination happens, right there. Watch if it didn't happen. We're gonna stay pronated. You ready? That's cool, huh? Did you feel it?
Yeah.
Did that answer your question?
What about like the owner deviation?
Well, yeah, that's there too. You're gonna ulna deviate, again, to keep your functional grip.
Okay.
Yeah, the ulna deviation, I would say, would be like the easier one to see. The radioulnar joint is tough.
Okay.
But ulna, yeah, you'd be ulna deviate.
Okay.
Well done. Well done. Thank you. Did you get that? Thank you. Stay. Boop. Beep boop. All right, so we got next. When do you guys start scheduling classes? Next week? So two things. One is biomechanics, 415. This is a prereq, and the first physics is a prereq, guys, 207, okay? So make sure you do that. Also, when you schedule for your classes and they do the teacher evaluations, right, your boy would love some positive feedback for once in his 12 years. So, hook me up, man. Give me some good news, man. Tired of hearing bad news. I want good news. Okay, good job, man, so far. Great conversation. Did that get answered for you?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. Good to hear. Left side, right side, left front, right front, middle front. Yeah.
What plane is the radioulnar joint using?
Woo,
Does that have
woo, woo.
a
What a great question.
So,
The question was, what plane does the radioulnar joint move in? And to answer that, we have to remember there's global references and there's local references, right? So what plane does it move in from the room? Well, it depends on where I'm at in the room. I could move the radioulnar joint in the room's frontal, the room's transverse, or the room's sagittal. However, because we reference everything to anatomical position, the radioulnar joint only moves in its transverse. Meaning that when I move it in the room, so doth its plane and axes move with it. So that way it's always just moving in its transverse plane. What a great question. Transverse plane,
Your subclavian joint moves in the frontal plane?
Ooh, another good question. Gliding joints, technically, it moves mostly in the frontal. But it's a gliding joint. It's not like there's one axis about which. So sometimes for these gliding joints that have significant motion, we just take an average, or we say mostly, because if my subtalar joint kept going, if you notice, when I start off, yeah, it's a lot of frontal, but as I keep inverting, I start to go more and more sagittal and less frontal. So I don't ask those questions about gliding joints because there's not one true fixed point about like elbow and shoulders. So gliding joints kind of have their own things.
And then on page 19, you have subclavian and transverse joints.
That's the, what's the word I'm looking for? Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Ooh, congratulations, right? Nobody spells it because no one knows how, so you just say congrats. Subtalar and transverse dorsal joints technically are all the different things they can represent, but we just say subtalar joint for short. It's easy. But subtalar and transverse dorsal joints are all the different pieces that are colliding. Just say, we just short that up. I have time. Go ahead.
Can you explain the planes of all of scapular motion, like elevation, depression, what plane would that be moving in?
No. But I'm answering it by saying no, because the scapula isn't a joint. Remember, like apple, banana, strawberry, sledgehammer, right? Sternoclavicular joint, acromioclavicular joint, glenohumeral joint, scapulothoracic articulation. There's way too much general motion, and it's not an arthrodial joint that has axes and stuff. So because it just orbits and there's a ton of general motion, we don't look at the scapula in terms of planes and axes. So when I say no, I'm just saying there's no answer to it. Yeah, we're good. I'm sorry if I terrified you. I didn't need to. I only do that because I like the question. It was a great question. So it's not that you can't. You'd have to bring it back to the sternoclavicular joint, honestly. So if we do the protraction, retraction, we could see like transverse. And if we do the elevation, depression, upward rotation, we could see frontal. And then when you bring it up a lot, then the collarbone kind of does a little rotation. But when we're talking about how the scapula moves about the thorax, there's just way too much. Unlike other joints, that there's just way too much general. There's way too much to kind of. Because I mean, if you think about it, if you did protraction, retraction, you'd be orbiting in the transverse plane. Yeah, actually, the only place in the scapula that has like a true axis on it is in upward and downward rotation, elevation, depression. It's actually on the spine of the scapula. But what's really cool about that is even when you do this, that axis of rotation drifts. So there's general motion to that too. But upward rotation of the scapula would fall as a combination of sagittal and frontal. I'm just answering your question like, hey, I'm curious about this. Because the scapula doesn't fit snug like this, and it sure doesn't fit snug like this. It's kind of in the middle. So it kind of has a combination of frontal and sagittal, absolutely. In fact, some therapists and professionals will call it the scapular plane. But it's not that there's this fourth dimension, it's just the combination of the sagittal and the frontal that the scapula rotates in relative to the scapula is its scapular plane, a combination of sagittal and frontal. Yes, sir?
So why don't we talk about the scapula in terms of its articulation with the clavicle?
We do. It's the acromioclavicular joint.
Yeah. So why wouldn't we say it's rotating around that joint?
Because it doesn't. What I mean by that is the acromioclavicular joint, the only motion it does allow for is a little bit of give when you do this. It doesn't do this. We don't want it. We don't want it to do any of that. It is the baton, as I lectured. I know it's been a long time ago, but I said the clavicle is the baton that the scapula transitions to the thorax. So this part right here doesn't have a lot of motion because we kind of need, if we're transitioning force from one to the other, we kind of need some stability there, right? You know, we want to make sure that nothing falls out of whack. In fact, when people get hit directly on the shoulder, usually it's a sprain of the acromioclavicular joint. It's meant to be more stable than it is to move, is the essence of the answer to your question. It's meant to be stable, not meant to move. And a great question. And again, the only reason we say scapular motion is because most of the muscles that influence all of our shoulder girdle are yanking on that flat scapula. You got a lot of muscles that are pulling on all that surface area. So I think that's why we say scapular depression, elevation, retract, because all the muscles that are tugging are mostly on the scapula itself. Great question. I feel like I'm in a trial. You guys are peppering me. Great question.
is horizontal abduction and adduction, like that, can you explain the difference between that and like rotation?
First of all, it's a great question. My hesitation is coming up with the analogies that I'm going to use to answer, okay? First of all, let's talk about the apples, and then we'll talk about the oranges, and then we'll kind of, which, by the way, you can totally compare apples and oranges. They're both fruit. Let's do horizontal AB and abduction. Remember that it's a variation of regular AB and AD. Add. Whoa! It's very similar, but now I'm in the trunks transverse plane, not the trunks frontal plane. And the reason that's important is because there's some variations in the muscles that are going to pull across this way versus the muscles that pull down that way. So it's a variation. It's taking the clock, rotating the clock so that way away towards 6 looks like this. Okay? So horizontal add, horizontal add, regular add, regular add, it's just my legs get in the way, my hands can't clap, but they would. Add, horizontal add, horizontal add, I can go horizontal and extend, and it gets me back to where I started. That's kind of how you know that out, in. Okay. Now, rotation is about the long bones perspective, because the reason is because the axis of rotation actually passes through the center of mass. In class, I said it's easier to roll a log on the water, but the log may weigh 5 tons, but I could easily rotate it by its center of mass. I'm not going to lift it up. So rotation is about the polar axis transverse plane. There's no work, linear work involved. Okay? So rotation would be internal, external, 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 external. Ab, horizontal add, internal, external, internal, external, internal, external, internal, external.
With like the perspective of the hip, I think there was an example that you were on my and was talking about that, like,
The one we did earlier?
or it was whenever you were explaining horizontal ab and adduction, but you, so you could have rotation with it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So that's-
Yeah. You can do, like, here's an example, like if you started here, I mean, I could do it in there as well, but horizontal ab with external rotation. Horizontal add with internal rotation. Or here I can have horizontal add with external, horizontal add with internal. Yeah, you'll find, you can do anything you want, but you'll find that certain patterns kind of work together depending on what you use for. Yeah, they're independent of each other. Good question. I hope I answered.
Yeah.
Can you give an example of global and local reference?
Okay. I can do jumping jacks in the room's frontal plane. Room's frontal, and that goes for my hips and my shoulders. Okay? And I know there's other things that might be moving, but I'm just talking about the hips and the shoulders to answer your question. Room's frontal, my frontal. Room's sagittal, my frontal. Room's transverse, my frontal. That's how that works. That make sense? Made sense? My gracious. Kidding, it ain't nothing in there, bro. Dude, my kids steal, dude. I wonder what that got in there. Oh, I found $10. Well, you better give me my money. One time, my son left, he left like a $5 bill out. I knew it was his. And so I put it in my pocket. He's like, Dad, you see my $5 bill? I was like, I found a $5 bill. He's like, that was mine. I was like, sure, why don't you identify it by the serial number? I was not happy. that it? Yes, ma'am.
When you look, when you posed as a figure skater at one time in class,
When I posed
There's
as a
a
figure
figure
skater, I was
skater.
going through some issues, and,
Yeah.
but I'm over it. But
would you be able to like go through the motions of if it's abduction and like rotation? When you was like turning the one leg, standing on it.
yeah, I'll be totally honest with you. I don't remember what exactly I did.
You were like this.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
I thought you meant like I did like that. That is, I'd say, a level above, I'm sorry, one level below
The 10 level.
difficulty of it, because with the kneeling, you got 2 hips involved. This one, you have 1. Well, I take it back. You have one that has motion, the other that looks like it does, but it doesn't, okay? So the concept is when I'm here and I do this, my pelvis, left transverse pelvic girdle rotated, because from its perspective, it's spinning to the left in the transverse plane. Even when I'm here, it's spinning to its left in the transverse plane. Now the hip motion wasn't internal or external rotation. That would look like this. So if I was here, that would be external rotation, and this would be internal rotation. See what I'm saying? This and this would be the same as this and this, moving the bigger piece about the smaller piece. So here I have right hip horizontal ab, right hip horizontal ad, because it's the same thing as this to there. Here.
Clear. And one more. When we think about the knee, it moves in a sagittal and transverse plane, technically.
Correct, but it can only move in its transverse when the knee has first moved in the sagittal. It has to unlock first in the knee. So the way I look at it is you use your knuckles. When your knee is in anatomical position or extended, you see how those knuckles kind of lock into place? Now, you don't have several knuckles, but you have condyles that act as knuckles in your knee. So when you flex, you see how you kind of, you unlock it, and it can have some rotation.
Thanks.
So is right lateral pelvic girdle rotation always associated with left lateral spinal bending?
Nope.
So like, could you show me a scenario where that wouldn't be the case?
Absolutely.
Alright.
And if I needed to get my keys, I could actually right lateral bend with right lateral pelvic girdle rotation if I'm trying to go all the way down. Right? I don't have to. Now, what I think you're fishing for is if you're hanging from a bar, yeah, like when your upper extremity is fixed, I can't break the bar to go in the same direction as the pelvis. So when your upper extremity is fixed, if you have right lateral pelvic, gotta have left lateral trunk axle. But to answer your question the way it was stated, I don't have to. My feet are on the ground. I could stay put, or I can bend the other way to cancel out, or I can bend in the same direction if I'm trying to pick up something.
So we still have that deal that if everyone gets that question right, the first test is good.
Okay, rehash the deal.
There was a question that you said would be on the test if everyone got it right.
Oh, dude, I'm totally confident in that. Yeah, and I even remember it, but I ain't gonna say it again. But yeah, I'll go in with it. That's fair. You got nothing to lose. There's no chance. Here's the points.
Yeah, I ain't got one.
Hey, you never know though. It could happen. I'm serious. I think every student that graduates from college now should get a minor in pre-law. Y'all are real good at that. Y'all are real good at it.
Minor.
Who has, okay, quick question. Quick question. Who plans on studying in groups? Y'all have some study groups set?
Yeah, boy.
Because I'm telling you, I feel that is by far the best way to study. Not where it's too many and all of a sudden you're talking about, Friends and Seinfeld, but that's back in my day. But my point is when you have small groups, you can come up with different examples and you can come up with different analogies. And you can check yourself where, well, I don't remember what he said about that. Oh, I have it in my notes, he said this. It's just a really good way to cover all your bases and practice. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
I have an example
We got 10 more minutes, bring it.
Okay, if you're, standing in anatomical position to start, you get onto your.
Not dip, baby.
I'll just do it.
Yeah, do it. You can do it.
Okay. So you get on your left tippy toe. Your left tippy toe, your right foot's off, and you're reaching as high as you can with your right arm.
Uh-huh.
How would you explain the motion of like the shoulder with everything else?
Okay, well, first thing is we're gonna do it joint by joint, right? We're not gonna do everything at once because that gets overwhelming. And we ain't got time for that. So you're on your left leg, is that correct?
Yes, but on your tippy toes.
Okay, great. So going up on my tippy toes. So there's a wheelbarrow effect there. You think of your foot as a wheelbarrow, and you think of your gastroc and those muscles pulling on your calcaneus. That's just your hands picking up on the wheelbarrow. And then the rotation at the wheel is really just your metatarsal phalangeals kind of doing like this. So from the ankles perspective, you're gonna have left ankle plantar flexion, right? Who cares what my right's doing? Whatever my right is doing isn't gonna make me go up in the air, right? So let's just forget about the right for now. So left ankle plantar flexion. If in graduate school you may do first metatarsal phalangeal extension, you could get further into it, but just for us, we're just kind of keeping it to the stuff I'm holding you accountable for. My right hip, when I do this, is going to have abduction because my pelvis had left lateral pelvic girdle rotation, right? So when I do this, my pelvis, I could see my left hip is abducted. So if I started here and did that, I had left hip abduction. From the pelvis's perspective, I'm pouring water out the left side, doing left cartwheel, rolling the ball to the left, however you see it. So left lateral pelvic girdle rotation. Now from here, this is what's cool. My trunk, yeah, it can bend, right? But if I'm trying to if I bend to the left, my hand goes higher up, right? Even though I didn't necessarily move my shoulder. So I kind of want to bend to the left if I can, because the more I bend this way, it's a function of a lever. Part of a first class lever means you can redirect an applied force. If this side of the lever goes down, what happens to the other side of the lever? Yeah, so my trunk can kind of function like that, is if I bend to the left, the other side of the lever goes up a little bit higher. So I'm probably gonna have some left lateral trunk bending, even though my pelvis spun to the left, because using that leverage, I can get my hand up a little higher, yeah. So, and then obviously I'm gonna have abduction. If I did it in the frontal plane, I could have flexion if I did it in the sagittal plane.
Now, would it be horizontal or no?
It totally depends on how you got there, right? I don't think it would be horizontal if you went all the way in the frontal or if you went all the way in the sagittal, right? If we did horizontal, it would have to be like, right?
Okay,
It's
so
just how you
not
get
Where
there.
you started from to the
Yeah,
top.
yeah. And then the scapula can help elevation of the rotation.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Would it not be upward rotation?
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't say that. Well, no, it would be both. Remember how I said technically upper rotation is really kind of a continuance of elevation? Absolutely, both of those would be correct. Up and across, yeah. Good, and listen, I'm glad you said that, because sometimes I accidentally say hands when I meant feet, so that's good. Okay, we're good? Get a good night's sleep. Carbo load